Supervisor Adam, please proceed.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, Ms. Gentles, but I think we're going to have to redo just a little bit of that. We were talking about how some of these things have a zero cost, and I was about to say that I disagreed based on the fact that if you were any other business, there's no way you could say that it had a zero cost when you're shoving the band up. Eventually, what's going to end up happening, if we don't end up with more money in the end, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, if we don't end up with more money in the end, we're going to have to terminate positions to continue to have that salary band respected within a department. Somehow, if you're going to raise the pay, and you don't have in a environment where you don't have any more money, then somebody's going to have to be terminated. You're going to have a service level reduction of some sort to allow you to continue to pay at that rate, right?
So I would say no. I would say that's not quite correct. I think that what would happen, so the way the plan is now, what you adopted in 2016, the board adopted that we would start to mirror the largest bargaining unit, which is SEIU. So when they get a negotiated increase, we would get that same kind of amount. That is a policy decision that is made every time, right? So we've made that kind of global policy decision that we would mirror, and that's the plan. But I'm assuming that if there were ever any difficult budget situation where we entered into another recession or something of that nature, the board always has the decision to freeze the salaries or to freeze that, which is what you've done in the past. What we're recommending here today, the action that you would take today, has no cost today or immediate cost. You are right in saying that, yes, with the bigger band, and if things continue as they are, you continue to approve the increases to mirror SEIU, yes, eventually it will grow. But the action that you're taking today, and the reason why I'm driving this point home, is zero, is because the last time I was before you presenting this first phase, I was asking for about $300,000 or so new money that it would cost you just to get us to the spot that we're at today. And so we did all of the heavy lifting early on, and this second phase is really a simpler phase that will cost you $47,000, and not even in new money. The departments will have to absorb that, the 5 departments that I mentioned, to deal with those 7 people. So I think, I see where you're coming from, but I think it's not exactly the same. We wouldn't be looking at layoffs or a reduction in force because we approve this salary scale. The board.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that that's the case, because you've already budgeted for it.
Right.
So you're saying that since we budgeted for it, so if we put 3% salary increases in the budget, then it's all budgeted and it costs nothing.
Right.
Right. Okay, well, that's not the rest. The rest of the world does not look at things like that. They just, their cost of production just went up 3%.
And Supervisor Adam, I appreciate your intensity on this, but could we, with staff, allow them to finish sentences? I know you're passionate, but
well,
she was speaking.
With all due respect to
there is some
HR director
decorum
Gentles,
that we should preserve
I think
here.
are you feeling that I'm not being decorous for you?
No, I feel that you're being just fine.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. She's a big girl. She doesn't
any
need you to help
department
her.
head worth their salt would say that they feel just fine even when they don't. So let's just preserve some decorum here.
If I could just say this, because I think we're talking about the same thing, but on two different tracks. You are 100% correct that the cost increase, even though it's budgeted for, there is an increase. Everybody knows that. That's just math, right? So yes, it has increased. The action, what I'm talking about today is the action that you're taking today and for the rest of this year has no new cost. And that's why I say additional cost. Additional cost is zero. I'm not asking for any new money, whereas before I was asking for new money, somewhere to the tune of $300,000. So you're right, there's no escaping that there is an additional cost. We've already budgeted that. That was already approved months ago. This is just putting a little bit of structure around a system.
Well, I love the intellectual honesty that we're going to come to this with, because I kind of, offended is the wrong word, but I got a problem when we say it costs zero, because it does cost something. And it may not even be a tremendous amount because there's not that many people. But I appreciate very much you're willing to have the intellectual exercise with me where we can agree that it costs something.
Yes.
It doesn't cost zero.
Yes.
Okay. So second problem for me is you have in the past told me that we don't have a retention problem.
That's correct.
We have 8 to 10%, which is sort of at the low end of normal retention issues.
I would say it's within the realm. I mean, you could be lower to, 5 to 7% would probably be good, but 8 to 10 is okay. Anything really above that starts to get a little concerning.
Okay. Well, so, and without listening to public comment, I'm just going to say that, I've always supported two kinds of raises. One of them is for compaction, and you're right. We haven't had the compaction issues since we've put into place the other program, and that's been good. And then lack of applicants for a position, and I don't think that that's where we are right now. We have everybody but the sheriff probably has pretty good applicant pools when they do a recruitment, right?
I would say so, yeah. We have pretty decent applications overall. Some of the positions in behavioral wellness, we have difficulty finding people to apply for those.
And we have addressed that with the physicians there and the psychologists and stuff. We have given raises, which I voted for. So, this is where, if you don't have a high turnover problem that you're trying to address, and if you don't have short pools of applicants, I think, you're kind of prophylactically trying to solve a problem that may never exist. Unless you allow it to exist or develop, then it doesn't exist.
So let me just clarify a little bit of what I've said in the past. So based upon the numbers overall, our retention rate is average, 8 to 10. When you look at different departments and break it down, it does go higher or lower. One of the biggest factors that create some of the feeling that there's a turnover issue and a recruitment issue is the loss that we experience within the first 5 years of employment, which I mentioned to you. Within the first year, we do lose 22% of the new hires. That's a big issue. And then we have the retirees, which, again, it depends on how you look at turnover. If you think that retirees is a part of turnover, which it can be, it is, or if you're looking at people who just voluntarily leave, they're not retiring, but they're leaving for other reasons, that's a bigger concern. And so we have those issues, and we have engagement issues, is what I like to say. And everything that you do, all of the policies and programs that you put into place, it all goes hand in hand. You really can't isolate just one issue and say this is the remedy for that issue. We're trying to create a culture, a cadre of policies and practices that speak to that whole basket of issues. Recruitment, retention, engagement, all of those things are important. And so I wouldn't, I'm not bringing this forward just as a tool for one specific thing. So if we could kind of just think of it more globally, and see that we're putting practices together that in the long run, and even in the short run, as demonstrated today in my presentation, has already saved you hundreds of thousands of dollars, and will continue to do that.
Okay, well, I just want to say that I really appreciate you going through the exercise with me, even if it seems a little bit strenuous to some. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Supervisor Lavaney, no.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, maybe in additional costs, we could just put unknown, right? Because it might be zero. Instead of saying zero, it could be something in the future. It will be something in the future. But anyway. So a couple of the things I'm concerned about was one of the things you mentioned. I have a question about so did you just say like 22% of new hires, and is that within the first year we lose?
That is correct.
Okay, and then another portion we talked about, only 25% of them actually go to an or to the main county in orientation. So they might be going to a department orientation.
That is correct.
Okay, so I don't know how the rest of you feel, but to me, I know you'd said you'd like to see it mandatory sometime in the future. For me, that future would be next week, because I don't see how employees that come in need to understand the entire makeup of the county and what our goals are and what our culture is. And maybe the reason why they're leaving is because they're in a silo and maybe they don't see growth in that department, not understanding that there's a whole other life outside that department, or they have some kind of interaction with a supervisor that they don't like, and they don't see that there's an ability to move. Because for me, I feel like if we hire an employee, unless it's for something technical, super technical that only exists, maybe it's IT, but some of these skills can be transferred around to different departments. And if the person's not a good fit in general services, they might be employee of the month in public works or something. So I don't want to lose. Talking about retention, there's got to be a significant cost associated with losing a quarter of your people in the first year. That's also scary to me. That why is that happening? Right. And I don't know if you have, if we're finding out what the main reason is.
And we've broken that down. Dawn has done some good analysis work on that. And when we look at the 22%, it's split between just a wrong fit, unrealistic job description, like this is not what they anticipated or thought the job was. Very few of them, very small percentage maybe accept a job and then something else happens in their life and they need to move away. But mostly it's failing on probation. Mm-hmm. So there's a disconnect somehow. Either we hired the wrong person or we weren't clear enough in what the job really was. So that's
the one where that kind of, from what I've seen, at least talking to people that get hired by the county, they beat out a bunch of other applicants to get to that position. I mean, even if it's for an AOP, it's competitive. Right. And so to get that person, I hope that I don't know, it just seems strange to me that you would think that once you went through that entire process, we've got the gem. Right. And so, okay, so I don't know how we implement that folks need to go to the orientation. To me, that's mandatory.
No raises.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing is about retention, so when we talk about cost savings associated with the retention pay, so is that for a 1 year? We basically give people a bonus to stay for one more year if they hit a certain, or is it just that you hit that year mark,
yes,
that 15, 20, 25 year? Okay.
That 5, 10, and 15. So we looked at, we did a longitudinal study and we saw when people are leaving, 22% in the first year, and then it slows down to year 2, year 3, year 4. So we thought if we could keep people to year 5, mm-hmm, then we can keep people to year 10,
Right.
So it was that kind of logic.
Then the last thing for me is just a question about, like, on the assignment pay. I totally think this is probably the best thing that we're doing as far as these changes, because there were people that it's hard to look at people in the eye that slept at the EOC and tell them, hey, that's just part of your job, because it's above and beyond some of these things. People worked months on end. But how many people are we talking about? I mean, for the public out there, we're not talking about the entire workforce. This is dozen.
Yeah, and it's really discretionary. I would assume that the CEOs will exercise, great discretion, in that. I know that this last year, I can just think of at least 3 or 4 people.
Okay. All right. So I just wanted to kind of put that into perspective for folks. I trust the CEO. She is very conservative, and it will go to people that actually went. So we're talking probably less than 10 in the last disaster, Mona, in your mind? 10, 15?
Supervisor Lavanina through the chair, yes. And if you look at the, Ms. Gentles didn't go through the specific language, but it says the recipient must be in good standing, have engaged in the activity above and beyond normal and customary duties for a period greater than 4 months. So there's been few people who've actually continued to work on the disaster greater than 4 months, and I think we know who they are.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any Supervisor Adam?
And I'm probably not going to be able to support the whole thing, but if anybody wants to break that special project extraordinary assignment payout, I would support that.
Is there public comment on this item?
No request to speak.
Is there other questions, comments, or motion? Supervisor Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Ms. Gentles, this has always, this broadbanding that we've had in the county, I think it's over 10 years, has always been a concern of mine. And there was a time when I just wanted to dismantle. I thought we should just dismantle the whole thing because it was so unwieldy. And I think what you said today was that to dismantle it is really unrealistic. Maybe you didn't use those terms, but that it would cost a lot of money and a lot of time to dismantle. So what you have consistently presented to us since you've been here has to normalize an unnormal situation. I think those were your words as well. And that's I think maybe the best that we can do. And what I've been so impressed by your work is how you've taken us incrementally through this process, and also knowing that we're not done, that there are other, you've pulled out chiefs of staff. I'm sure you're going to be pulling out other distinct job titles as we move through this. So I think CEO Miyasato is on the same page and is very supportive of this. I think you're working on normalizing the salary band is for managers makes so much sense. And I know when we've talked or I've had a question about this, your response is not just to show me the scatter chart, but you've put a lot of work and expertise behind this and statistical analysis behind the numbers that you're giving to us. So it's not just, you're just not pulling numbers out of the air. I think they're based on a rational reason. I love that you're condensing the band. I think you're right, and you've shown that a lot of folks would start at the high end of the band, and by actually increasing the minimum range, that there's the opportunity for more people to start closer to that control point rather than at the maximum. And that will, as you pointed out, it will save us money, and it also gives people room for growth. I think maintaining the manager's salary with our other units is very important. Otherwise, we get into the compacting issue that we've seen, and then we have to come up with additional money. This will keep us in line with the other groups. I also think what is the pay that's called for the emergency services folks?
Oh, the special assignment.
Special assignment pay is also a brilliant move. And as CEO Miyasato brought up, there are some limitations and some guidelines to follow. So, and I also appreciate your fiscal analysis that you have on the last page. which does show the allocation of the funds for what we're looking at for the managers. So I am in total support of what you've done for us in the past, but really what's before us today, to you and your team, I think you deserve a lot of accolades for, again, moving us. I just loved what you said. Normalize a very unnormal situation to the best extent that we can. So I'm ready to. I'll make a motion, Mr. Chair. First, that I don't know if there's other. I'm sorry, Joan. I'll make a motion, and then, do you want me to make a motion, and then you want to speak, or do you want to speak now?
That's fine.
Okay.
Whether there'll be more to the motion after I speak, I don't know.
Okay. Well, so I'll make a motion to Supervisor Adams' point. I'll make two motions. The first one is to add the special project extraordinary assignment pay.
And then let's vote on that.
So there is a motion, but no second. Oh, Supervisor Adams, second. So the motion is to vote separately on the special assignment pay. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. Supervisor Wolf?
And now I'll move the other 3 points to normalize the percentage spread in salary band from 60% to between 45 and 49%, adjust the leadership classification salary bands by the negotiated percentage increase in market data, and establish a new classification and salary bands for Board of Supervisors, Chiefs of Staff.
Supervisors, if I may, I think there are some other administrative changes and language changes in the plan that's provided to you. So if you could just adopt the balance of that might be more helpful.
I'll adopt the balance of the plan. I'll move that we adopt the balance of the plan.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
I'd like to hear Supervisor Hartman's comments before I second that, and then we vote on it so that we get everybody's input.
So normally a motion would die for lack of a second, but we will suspend that for a moment. Supervisor Hartman.
Well, I wanted to say that I certainly agree with what Supervisor Wolf had to do about the incremental changes. This could be very disruptive, and you've been able to do it bit by bit in a way that has been very smooth and fluid. I'm, like Supervisor Lavanino, concerned about that 22% in the first year. And my early career was in the academic world, where it's well understood that retention is key. You spend all this money on recruitment and advertising and traveling, and by the time you get students, you want to keep them and you invest in that. It seems to me with the county that's even more the case, because you're investing in training them. And so I would like to hear you talk a bit more about what we're doing to make it a better fit, and then following up on, again, what Supervisor Lavanino said about the orientation. I think that is a critical component, and with only 25% of our people involved in that, how can we act sooner rather than later? Is there anything we can do today to say, this is required? This is something that being an employee of Santa Barbara County means you've got to learn what that means.
So I'll start off with the 22% in the first year. This was the statistics that we've been sharing for the last couple of years, because it is pretty astonishing. And what we've put into place is we said that we were going to try to reduce that number by 2% each year to within a certain range. I mean, you're going to have some turnover, so and so I think we reduced it this last budget cycle. I think we reported that it was about 19. So we had done some things. Some of the things that we're doing is the new employee orientation. Again, those people that are coming, we are trying to get them to understand that there's a social network, because that's part of what keeps people on the job, as well as having friends, having a social network, understanding what the county is all about. The other thing that we've put into place, and quite frankly it hasn't taken off as it should, is the state interviews. We encourage people to do stay interviews within the first 6 months of a person's hire, just to check in with them to say, are you still convinced you made the right decision? How is it going? Are you getting everything that you need? So that's one thing that we could just reinforce a little bit more. We've implemented it, but it has not taken off the way it needs to take off. The other thing that we've incorporated is what we call it a mixer. So for all new hires that were hired within, this was for management, employees that were hired within the first 6 months, we invited them to what we called a mixer, where they could get together, and it's a cohort group, again, just to try to build some of that connectedness. But there's a lot more that we could do. We really need a sophisticated onboarding system that identifies specific training that people need to have within the first 30 days, specific, things that they should be doing that will increase that retention. We just don't have that, but there's great opportunity there.
Mandatory orientation attendance?
And the mandatory orientation. So we revised and implemented a new employee orientation in April of 2016. And at that time, we chose not to make it mandatory because it was new, and we just really wanted to generate enthusiasm from the ground up. And that hasn't worked because some departments have their own orientation, and they want to just have their people go to that. But I think that if we're really trying to enhance large-scale organizational change, mandatory new employee orientation, where we talk about the specific values of the county, specific expectations of the county, it does need to be, mandatory. That is a policy decision that you all can make, and if you make that decision, then that's what we do.
Mr. Gazzone, do you have any guidance for us here?
Chair and Supervisors, so it sounds like a very positive thing, but for the CEO's implementation of this, she also has elected department heads that she'll be interacting with. So one possible action today would just provide direction to CEO on this, and that would provide her some latitude for rollout.
And Supervisors,
So instead of a motion requiring mandatory employee that we direct to explore some sort of mandatory, whether it's in order to achieve a raise of a certain amount or something.
It could be pretty directive on this. I'm just sensing that with elected department heads, some of whom control the deployment of their personnel, it gives CEO an opportunity to talk with them before implementing.
Supervisors, I'm happy to take that direction. I think it's necessary. It's something the HR director and I just spoke about, and it's not for a lack of not wanting to do it. We want to understand the department's issues, but also ensure that HR has enough staff to continue to do these on an ongoing basis and frequently enough to meet our department's needs. So it's both things, but I'm happy to take that direction.
So I would second Supervisor Wolf's motion, and then I think this direction doesn't need to be part of the motion.
Okay.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for belated second. Yes, Supervisor Wolf.
So on the 22%, how many of those are ones that didn't meet the probationary period?
So I don't have today's data in front of me, but going off of memory, I would say that, gosh, out of the 22%, I'm going to say around maybe 11% of that was failed on probation. Okay. And then a split between some other things.
And, I think none of us, when we hear 22%, it is a lot. And I think there's things that you've mentioned that we can reduce that number. But the flip side of that, and something that I've especially in public employment, is these probationary periods are really important, and evaluations are really important. And if there is ever a time, a determination that there is not a good fit, then that is the time to move in that direction. Otherwise, that employee then becomes part of our county system, and it's much more difficult to take any action. So that probationary period even it's 11%, and we may not want that, and perhaps the onboarding will help us decrease that number. But I also think it's important for department heads to know, for at least for me, that I appreciate the fact that they are doing the evaluations and making those tough calls early on, because sometimes if they don't make those tough calls, it gets much harder. So anyway, I just wanted to make that comment. Otherwise, I'm ready for the vote. And thank you for your addition to the second.
Supervisor, through the chair, if I could just make one comment on that on behalf of departments. I appreciate that on the probation period. But I also want to say that our departments are now hiring people who are third, fourth, fifth, top of the list, meaning they've offered and the candidates are declining. So it means that sometimes we're getting candidates who meet our criteria, but they're not the best candidate that we wanted for the job. And we're hiring them because that's the list and that's our process, and they'd like to get someone into the position. And through the probationary process, they're finding out they're not a good fit. So I just want to make sure your board also understands that we're having challenges in finding the right people, and we're often being declined by our candidates as we go through the process.
And if I could just say, I think by increasing the minimum on our band, that might help as well.
I'll be supporting the motion. I think as long as I've been here, there has been this quandary of some of the heavy lifting managers being in the doldrums, and obviously that's not a good thing for the culture. And we've said no to a lot of proposed solutions, so I think we have been discriminating about how to not do this in a way that breaks the bank or sends the wrong signal. So I think this has been a prudent and restrained response, and we'll be supporting it. There's a motion and a second. Any other comment? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? 4-1. Next item, our legislative platform.
Chair Williams, members of the board, item 3 is from the County Executive Office. It's a hearing to consider recommendations regarding the draft 2019 County of Santa Barbara Ledge Platform.
Mr. Bozanich, please proceed.
Thanks, Chair Williams. Members of the board, I'm here presenting the initial draft of the 2019 County of Santa Barbara Legislative Platform for the purpose of a board discussion. You will not be acting to approve the legislative platform at today's meeting, as I will mention in a moment. That will come in December. So at this point, we'll get the slide presentation. So just a brief update on what has led us to this point. So the review of the current planks and principles for the ledge platform, we start with the 2018 as our starting point. The committee, ledge program committee, in July considered any additions or deletions, new planks they might want to do, or any new principles. At that time, the ledge program committee suggested we added material on disaster preparedness, disaster response, and recovery to our principles, and you'll see that in the draft before you today. In August, the departments reviewed and updated their planks, so we send the planks out to all the department directors who are the subject matter experts on all of these planks, and we asked them to update them and provide us with their comments and reviews, updates, and we're going to go through those in a moment. Then in September, the Ledge Program Committee took all of those updated planks and principles and reviewed and commented on those for further clarification. And then at their October meeting, the committee received an initial draft of the 2019 Ledge Platform, which is what is attached to this board item today. And it includes the state of the platform at this point in time, subject to your comments and suggestions today. And so really the purpose for today is to review, discuss, and recommend additional changes to the 2019 platform for the entire board here. And then the committee will review those at its November 5th meeting for inclusion of those recommended changes. And then we will return for final approval on December 11th to this body, to the board as a whole, on December the 11th. Also at that time, we will have added the year-end summaries and some of the other front matter that we include as part of our document of the past year. And we'll also have a report from the advocates will be joining us on kind of a review, and you're able to engage them in discussion at that meeting on the 11th. So just to walk through the changes today, it might be helpful for the board and for the public if they want to follow along, just to go through the red line versions, the attachment that is the red line version of those. And I just want to point out those items, not where there are minor changes, but where there are more significant changes, for example, to requested actions. I think those are often the most kind of critical things that your board would want to have some conversation and discussion about. And so I'm just going to review them. So on the advancement of women and girls, we didn't have any substantive changes, just some minor editorial changes. On the arts and cultures plank, again, no changes of significance. On the comprehensive immigration reform plank, no substantive changes. On the economic enhancement and revenue diversification plank, we did, at the request of the committee, go back and make sure that those tied out to what is in our ECAP plan. And so we did get a note from the department about the elements in the requested actions that do tie back to the ECAP. Looking at the Lower Mission Creek project plank, what was updated by the Public Works Department was the spending associated, and updated those financial numbers, the funding tables for the Lower Mission Creek project, flood control project. On the marketplace equity and consumer protection plank, no changes. On the sustainable groundwater management funding plank, there were some additional kind of editorial changes and narrative changes to the summary of the issue, but nothing significant in the requested actions.
And we fixed the basins and their priority levels, correct? Because that was updated by the state board this year.
That is correct, Chair. On the U.S. Highway 101 regional piece, again, no changes of substance there.
Mr. Chair. Yes. Thank you. Do you want us, if we have a question as we go through this, should we stop, or you want us to wait?
If you have a significant one, let's do it at the end. If it's just clerical, please go as we go.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to say it's significant, so we'll wait.
Okay.
I don't know how to.
We'll judge
everything I say is significant, but I'll wait. So let's come back to that one.
You want to come back to, I'll kind of hold that one out then. On the U.S., the Highway 101?
Yeah.
Thank you. I will put that aside. Next was the child support access to sealed court files. No changes by the department. On libraries, no changes. No changes on the local governance and unincorporated powers plank. No changes on the modernization of child support programs. No significant changes to the Farm Bill funding for 2018 on disease management. There were significant changes added by the Ag Commissioner's Department on the next plank, which is new pests of concerns. And so you may want to review those, but again, supplied by our Ag Commissioner and staff. Moving forward, the public safety plank had some minor updates based on the public safety realignment plan that was approved by your board recently. On the sustainable infrastructure funding plank, no significant changes. No significant changes on the Hollister State Street Improvements Project. Minor funding updates on the Lake Kachuma plank provided by the department. No significant changes on the telecommunications legislation plank. No significant changes on the Trimal Gaming Compacts and Land Use plank. No significant changes on the access to quality health services. Some minor requested action changes on the health in our community plank, again suggested by the Public Health Department. On the homelessness plank, we added, at the request of the Behavioral Wellness Department, a support statement for No Place Like Home regulations that provide local discretion on program design. The ocean water testing plank was suggested that it be removed by the Public Health Department.
Why?
We've asked the department directors to be available in Santa Barbara, so I'm hoping that we can come back to that one. So I'll put that aside, but I don't recall off the top of my head, but I'm hoping Dr. Reynoso is available. On the organized delivery system, we didn't have any changes on that particular one. Safety net preservation, just some minor updates to statistics that are embedded in the narrative. On senior services funding, some updates were provided by the department about the impacts, especially the update on the demographics. On social services TANF reauthorization, no significant changes. I will note that on the next plank, which has typically been the state social services funding costs of doing business increase plank, was requested that we remove that by the department. The subsidized child care plank has some fairly significant, though not important, kinds of changes, mainly just to the wording and to the description of where we are with the financing of child care in the state. The next plank is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act funding, and there's some narrative changes to the summary of the issue there. Moving now to the Agricultural Williamson Act subvention, no changes to that particular plank, nor are there any changes to the Air Quality Marine Vessels emissions plank. Next is the Community Development Programs plank, and there are some wording changes for both the summary of the issues as well as the requested actions. Again, these changes were recommended by the department. Similar kinds of changes to the energy and climate plank were added by the department, both to the summary as well as to the requested actions. Appears as though we got two versions of the energy and climate changes. I believe the first one is the one that ought to is driving the changes that are included. So we'll make sure if there's comments on that one, we can clarify which changes are included in the energy and climate. I apologize for the double entry on that one. Some minor changes to the Healthy Soils Initiative plank. Minor changes again, or actually no changes actually were recommended on the historic courthouse plank. No changes on the oil and gas infrastructure safety and compliance plank. Next, on the parks and open space plank, the second district with their eagle eye noted that we had provided in the original draft attachment older version of this parks and open space plank, which we corrected on Friday to make sure that we included the Goleta Beach Park project as the final item on that first page. So if you have not already moved over the attachments from attachments 3 and 4 that were added late on Friday, it's important to note, if you're just looking at attachments 1 and 2, that the Goleta Beach Park needs to be added back into that, which would make it, have it be consistent with what we did, what your board approved in 2018 would now be approved in 2019. Almost at the end here, the Regional Coastal Management Projects Federal Authority, Plank, no significant changes. No changes for the support of waste recovery and reduction programs, Plank. And no changes for the wastewater treatment systems, Plank. Sorry that's long and tedious, but I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to see at least what the changes were for each Plank. At this point, that concludes my presentation of the draft legislative platform. I'd ask you to receive this report on the issues and projects included as part of that draft 2019 platform. Provide your staff with any direction about recommended changes, and also make the CEQA findings that this doesn't constitute a project under CEQA.
Supervisor Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the sustainable groundwater management funding, I just saw this letter from Heal the Ocean, and they had a couple of issues. One I just wanted to ask was about the groundwater basins. And as I'm looking at this, as I'm looking at the platform, do we mention the groundwater basins?
We do. Chair Williams, Supervisor, we do. On that groundwater plank, pretty sure, I'm trying to get back to that point.
They say that there's actually 6 within the county.
That's the point that we
Identified.
brought up at the last committee meeting.
So has that's been fixed?
Chair, Supervisor Wolf, that has been fixed.
Okay. And I know on the US 101 regional, that's the next one, I was just wondering if there might be an opportunity to update that because some of the Highway 101 project has been completed, and there's a few remaining sections that need to be completed. And so if you could just also contact Margie as another contact person on that, just to update, because we've had the same plank for many years, and I think we should probably say what we've done and what's remaining.
Got it.
Then I think Supervisor Hartman was going to talk about this too. She asked a question about why ocean water testing was eliminated, and I'm concerned about that as well. So you said it was removed from the Public Health Department. So I'd like to hear from the Public Health Department about why that was removed, and if there is, well, let's just hear from her first.
Supervisors, I've just checked, and it looks like Dr. Dorinos is not in the Santa Barbara hearing room. We did bring this up at Ledge Committee, and I believe if you look at the plank, the last plank was to ask for funding for the ocean water testing. So I believe, as I recall, her answer was that they wouldn't stop doing it, that they were no longer requesting funding for it. But we can double check. This comes back to you in November, and we can put that question out and come back to you with a more definitive answer in November.
Well, one thing I remember, this was from a few years ago, it had to do with the timing of the water testing, that our system allowed us to get the results in a few days, but there is a system that you can get it within 24 hours that would cost us additional funds. And so I'm glad, so thank you, CEO Miyasato, you'll look into that, and that would be one of my questions about that, is getting additional funds for that. And thank you for clarifying the parks piece. And there was also something else in that, because it said something about, oh, I know. that we have a aquatic facility. Actually, we have 2 aquatic facilities. That's in the first paragraph of the Parks and Open Space. And then my same comment would apply to APCD when it comes to the marine vessel. That I think if you could just check in with Arlen Janae and get an update on that, because we have seen some improvements and there may be other more updated information from APCD. So it would be good to see them as a contact.
Chair Williams and Supervisor Wolf, I did talk to Arlen, and they definitely were comfortable with staying with the existing plank as it was written.
Okay,
I
good.
made a specific point, since there had been legislation that had been passed and funding provided to that program through cap and trade funds.
Right.
So they were comfortable with leaving it as is, because it's not necessarily an ongoing funding source that's associated
Okay,
with that.
well, that's good to know. So I would just add her name then as a contact. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Hartman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dennis, I just had a question about context. How do we use this? I assume we give it to our lobbyists in D.C. and in Sacramento. But are there any priorities, and how do we share it? How can we, the board, better work with our legislators and, work on priorities? I mean, it seems like we really. I like to have, these are the 3 to the 5 things we're really working on, and then try to tick them away. And this is sort of overwhelming, and I don't know how we think about priorities and how we hustle for them.
Chair Williams and Supervisor Hartman, it's an excellent question. So we, as both as your staff and then the committee, regularly are taking positions on pieces of legislation as they move through the process, either in Washington, D.C. or in Sacramento. And we're constantly evaluating through the great work of our advocates, our contract advocates in both of those locations, to identify how pieces of legislation either align, in which case we might support a piece of legislation, or don't align, and so we might take an opposed position. We also use individual planks, often in doing administrative advocacy, both with the administration in Sacramento or with the federal administration in D.C. And the nice thing, when we try to keep these planks to kind of the single page, they make good leave-behind kind of resources as we make visits with legislators in their offices to say, here's why this is important to the county of Santa Barbara. So they provide a nice individual leave-behind piece of material for those legislative advocacy moments and lobbying efforts that we conduct on a regular basis in the Capitol. Largely, the principles are what really drives a lot of our positions. It's often not likely that a particular piece of legislation aligns perfectly with one of our planks. There's some general things, but the principles often do align with what we are trying to accomplish. And so that is often the basis of our advocacy letters that we send.
Supervisor Adam.
Well, 2 things. One is, I didn't know that, back to that Hillary Hauser letter from Heal the Ocean, I didn't know that Santa Maria was a medium or high priority groundwater basin.
The state board did just change several of the designations within the last couple months.
Well, that one's adjudicated, so it's pretty much not on the list. That's what I was understanding. I don't know if she's right or if she just misunderstood.
I can't speak to it just because I'm paying attention to the ones in my district.
Okay.
But several have changed just in my district.
Okay. Well, I know that one intimately. The other thing is, I've always had a problem with the legislative platform, and there's a couple poison pills in there that I just can't support, and it keeps me from supporting the whole thing. So I don't know if there's any interest in trying to break that thing up and seeing if there's things that we could have a 5-0 vote on. If not, I've fought that fight before, and I have a new board here, or parts of it, so I thought I'd ask again, and if nobody wants to go through that, then that's fine.
As chair, I'd just say that would be an unwieldy process that might never yield an end, because there's not everything in any alleged platform that I agree with, and so it would make the process far more time consuming at very least. Supervisor Lavanino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to let folks know too, I've always had a problem kind of with the whole thing, but as a member of the Ledge Committee, just remember that this is a guideline, and these are, when legislation comes through, we try to fit them into here, but if something's you don't want to hear, I don't think you want to hear every bill, otherwise we would be at the State Assembly or the State Senate. So there's things in here I, have a problem with as well, but overall, I don't think we want to go through each individual plank, because there's really nothing. I mean, we could craft that plank to where we would get a 5-0 vote maybe, but then there's nothing that fits into that plank. So I'm okay with the way it is. The one comment I have is just as the NACO rep, just wanted to let the board know that I think that there's, from what I'm hearing, is that there's a move back to earmarks at the federal level, maybe under a reform process. But so I just want to kind of throw a signal out there to our staff that we should have prepared not just little leave behinds like this, but we kind of need to do a top, as Supervisor Hartman was saying, here's our top 5 projects that need to be funded that are in need of federal funding. It goes back, I think this Kachuma page probably goes back 10, 15 years. I know it was when I was working with Congressman Gallagly, these same projects, boat ramp extension, boat dock replacement, those types of things were still on there. So I don't know if those are in our top 5 priorities for the county. I'm sure 101 is up there, but we should have getting ourselves ready for shovel-ready earmark projects that might come out of some sort of transportation project, either through the administration or Congress, looking for projects in our district that are ready to be funded. So just a heads up on that.
We have
Just one, Supervisor, just for some clarity, for today's action, it's a receive and file and provide direction, which I think you've done. We're coming back on December 11th for your approval of the legislative platform.
We have 2 requests to speak.
Chair Williams, members of the board, we're going to go to Santa Barbara for Hillary Hauser, and then back here for Andy Caldwell.
Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. Hillary Hauser from Hill the Ocean. Interesting to hear you speaking on all these issues, and we agree with a lot of the things that you brought up about the. I'm glad our letter reached you at the late hour. We really do agree with the recommendation for the county to seek funding a program of financial assistance in the form of grants for septic to sewer conversion. During the Rincon project, it was really critical that we had money for assessment engineering and other engineering. We think it would be good to put into this document the problematic areas that the Board of Supervisors has recognized previously, as you've done with the Sigma section. We made a comment about updating the groundwater basin list. So I'm not sure what the final statement is on the Santa Maria Basin, but anyway, in any case, that list should be complete by the time the legislative platform is passed. We agree with the comments made about ocean water testing. It's inconceivable that Santa Barbara would delete that when it's the basis of our existence and tourism and so forth. It's important that we keep that somehow. Also, could we recognize the issues of flood control and water quality related to homeless encampments in waterways? We need to address this and see if we can get some funding for help for this. Heal the Ocean's working on the Summerland issue. And lastly, there's a dire need for actual IPR, DPR projects in collaboration on a regional solution, which includes the city desal plant as a regional facility, along with all agencies adding reclaimed water to their profiles. So I don't know which section that belongs in, but if we could possibly put this into the platform, it would be great. Thank you.
Mr. Caldwell?
Chair Williams, members of the board, Andy Caldwell representing CoLab. Before Supervisor Adam came up with the term the colonies, the late great County Supervisor Joni Gray used to make it a point to try to bring every newly elected South County supervisor and anybody else she could find on a tour of the North County to show the difference in the communities. And the way she used to explain it is that the South County is urban. It's entirely urban for the most part now. And it's highly educated. The industry is high tech. You've got a college, a university, a couple colleges, university, city college, lots of government employees and the like. And she juxtaposed that to the North County. North County is rural. There is an absolutely stunning number of people in the North County that don't have a high school education. A stunning number. There is a stunning number of people in the North County that don't speak English or Spanish. English or Spanish. So the question is, and this is my life story on myriad levels. Even though I got a college degree, social science, I didn't go to law school, it was worthless in the job market at the time. I started as a straight graveyard laborer at Sinton and Brown. 7 years later, I became industrial relations manager. One day I was sitting there hiring somebody that didn't speak English, and I realized, wow, this is Jamie Gonzalez's dad, my best friend growing up. That's what I was thinking. This is my best friend's, this is 40 years ago. This guy's going to go from field work to factory work. He's going to send all 4 kids to college. He's going to own a couple of houses because we provided a transition with manufacturing and industrial jobs. We had a ladder that had all the rungs in it in the North County. We had all the rungs. We had high tech. Vandenberg Air Force Base and a lot of other things, but we also had blue-collar manufacturing, a gateway to middle class with people with a high school education or less. English speaking didn't matter. Those jobs are gone. The last ones left is the oil industry. Look at your policies. How many people, the shoe doesn't fit the foot of the North County. The shoe doesn't fit. The jobs you want to create, the energy policies you want to implement, getting rid of the oil industry destroys what's left of upward mobility for a permanent urban underclass. Drive through Lompoc someday and ask them how high-tech jobs, whether that fits that foot. Thank you.
That concludes public comment.
So I think we provided some direction. Is there other direction that the board would wish to provide? Supervisor Hartman.
Well, I just wanted to follow up with Heal the Ocean, Hillary's comments about the septic system. I think I saw you taking notes, Dennis, but just wanted to reinforce that.
And I don't know if it's the something we should do this year, but something we definitely should consider integration with this idea that Ms. Hauser just brought up of funding to take care of not only the homelessness aspect of impacts from camps, but water quality impacts. We do have an issue in Summerlin. There's obviously an issue in Lompoc, and you know, to Ms. Hauser's credit, when she came to me on the Summerlin issue, I said, okay, let's do something that solves it in the long run, and instead of telling me off, which would be maybe anyone's first instinct, given that our respective strong personalities, she said she did it. They are funding an effort with the United Way of Northern Santa Barbara to try to address the root causes and come up with some substantive solutions. But sure, I'm sure the help from the county for getting funding on that would be appreciated.
Just, Chair, on that note, I found a place that might fit well in our health in our community plank to include both, water quality issues in the stream bed, as well as the practical health challenges that are faced by folks that are homeless. So I just suggest I'll work with the department. I'll work with Dr. Reynoso on crafting that.
Thank you. Sounds great. Other comments, questions? Then motion to receive and file.
Second.
There is a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? It's unanimous. With one person not doing a bio break. Can we take the next item and then we'll go to lunch break?
Chair Williams, members of the board, item 4 is from Supervisor Adam. It's a hearing to consider recommendations regarding the discussion of the hoop structure ordinance amendment project.
And we will wait for Supervisor Adam unless you are ready to proceed. Great.
What are we doing, voting on receiving and filing? Oh, I'm up. Oh, well, I told you there was a bio break necessary.
I tried to provide
I stayed here. I stayed in the saddle as long as possible, and at some point I got to get down. All right, so we are going to have Chief of Staff Bob Nelson give us a little primer here of why we're here today. I'm going to let Bob start out. Oh, well, heck, we haven't even read it in.
Please proceed.
Yep, Chair Williams, members of the board, I already read this into the record.
Oh, you did? Okay. Well, I wasn't here. I don't know.
Chairman Williams and members of the board, Bob Nelson. 4th District Chief of Staff presenting for Supervisor Peter Adam.
No.
There we go. I'll start over.
Better.
Thank you. Chairman Williams and members of the board, Bob Nelson, 4th District Chief of Staff presenting for Supervisor Peter Adam. Our office's board letter sets forth our concerns and outlines the needs for board action, but for this presentation, I will quickly provide background and then report on the current status. On July 27th, 2017, the Board of Supervisors took action to pursue option 4 of the 5 options presented to them in dealing with hoop structures. Option 4 included an LUDC amendment, exemption of hoop structures equal to or less than 20 feet. It also considered a range of permit options for addressing hoop structures greater than 20 feet, including development standards. Staff planner Julie Harris clarified in her presentation In both options 3 and 4, we would propose an exemption for those hoop structures less than 20 feet tall.
Supervisor Williams.
I guess support option 4 as long as we are willing to continue to exempt who passes under 20 feet, and not start messing with, well, unless there's so many acres of it or something like that. And just keep it real simple and keep it straightforward that all who passes under 20, equal to or under 20 feet are exempted.
So we have a motion and a second. Could we get a roll call vote? I don't know. Supervisor
The
Williams?
clarification on the motion, is that in the motion or not? Because that's the way I understood option 4, but the way that the discussion went sort of drifted from that.
I think, as I'm looking at Ms. Black, that is within the parameters of option 4.
Supervisor Adams?
So could we read back the motion?
The motion is to give direction to staff that the board would like you to pursue option 4. And then all the other, there you go. Receive and file this report, provide the direction to staff to pursue option 4, and to determine today's actions are not a project pursuant to CEQA.
And Ms. Supervisor Williams?
And that part of that is exempting who passes under 20 feet in all cases.
That's part of it.
Okay.
As you can hear from the video clip, Supervisor Williams clarifies the motion twice. Supervisor Wolf confirms with then Deputy Director Black that an exemption in all cases for hoop houses under 20 feet would be in the parameters of the environmental review for option 4. Fast forward to today. The current staff-directed process has fallen short. Planning staff has failed to include as a project alternative an exemption for hoop houses less than or equal to 20 feet as directed by board action, and thus it was not studied as part of environmental review. Upon our office learning of this problem, the 4th District has worked with planning staff to try to resolve the incongruence between board direction and staff's actions. Planning has taken steps towards correcting this problem, but they have represented to us that they cannot fully correct their course without board intervention. Without a course change, the Planning Commission and the board will have a limited array of options. In bringing this item, it is not our office's intention to influence the Planning Commission's independence or decision-making process, or the board's for that matter. Mark Chatillo, in his public comment at that July 27th hearing, recommended that the board chart this course broadly at first so that you can come up with a wide range of options and alternatives that you can then consider as you move forward within the policy realm. Our intention today is to make sure that the Planning Commission and your board have those options, and we respectfully request board direction in this matter. And these would be our recommended actions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nelson. For me, this is about, who runs this place? The board, I've always been told since I've been here, the board creates policy and the staff executes it. And in this case, and I didn't even vote for this thing. I don't have a dog in the fight, really, but just as a policy matter, the question is do we give direction and have it followed, or do staff run off and do something other than what we asked them to do? And I think it should be possible for us to pull it back at this point or to give some direction. And I know we can't give direction to the Planning Commission, But I think it should be possible for us to work out a way to do a redo or a partial redo on this thing so we can go back and get what we wanted to get in the first place, and have that as an option that gets studied in the AIR and not run all the way by this without having even studied the option that we told them specifically and graphically that we wanted to have studied. And then, you know, the Planning Commission, it's entirely possible the Planning Commission comes up with a different set of answers, you know, and then they send that back to us. I mean, the way the whole thing's wired is we send them some ideas, they flesh them out, staff does the EIR, and then they can say, you know, we don't like an exemption under 20 feet. That's a possible outcome. You know, and I'm not trying to influence that outcome. The Planning Commission has their own independent opinion. And if they send us back something that looks an awful lot like what they're queued up to send us now because of the limited nature of what we've studied, then that's fine. And then we have some alternatives. We can do a number of different things. But the problem at this point is what got studied is a limited set of things which we didn't ask for to be studied. So I'm just kind of wondering what my colleagues think about that. And, you know, I would think that they would kind of jealously guard their power that's been vested in them by the people that elected them. But that may be something that you guys are really comfortable with, just deferring to staff. I don't know. But this is such an egregious and graphic example that I couldn't just let it go by. So I'm interested to hear what my colleagues have to say about that.
Supervisor Hartman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, the first thing I have to say about it is that there may be a difference of opinion about what the board asked for. I think the 20-foot exemption was pretty clear, but that it be without any development standards whatsoever, to me that isn't demonstrated by the clip or the text you have. But this comes to me without any record, so one, there's problems of notice. I don't even know what to do with this, but I would like to ask Ms. Black if you could just frame this for us. Where have we been? Where are we today? I believe the Planning Commission was to consider this tomorrow, and it got pulled, so the whole thing is delayed by this rather odd procedure.
Chair Williams and members of the board, I want the board first of all, to know that the department did not provide the consultant preparing the HOOPS EIR specific enough instructions to implement the direction of the Board of Supervisors to exempt HOOPS under 20 feet or 20 feet or under in all cases. We treated this project like all other long-range planning projects, and as is the normal CEQA process, where the project description is studied in the EIR and mitigation measures are identified to address potential impacts. This is a long answer to your short question. I regret, and I'm sorry, I didn't catch this misunderstanding of the board's direction earlier, before we were so far along in the process and after the Planning Commission hearings started. I was not aware of this issue until Bob Nelson informed me of his concern in late June. Immediately following that, I watched the same tape. In fact, I watched it many times, and I watched a much longer piece of it and reviewed the EIR. And by that time, the draft EIR had been completed, a proposed final EIR was prepared, and the ordinance was before the Planning Commission. There was no opportunity for staff to address mitigation measures without obtaining direction from the Planning Commission. At the next and third Planning Commission hearing on this matter, which was on August 29th, staff outlined what would be necessary to address each of the mitigation measures in the EIR. consistent with the board's initial direction, and advised that for the biological mitigation measures, recirculation of the EIR was advised. The Planning Commission provided direction at that hearing to eliminate all of the mitigation measures related to aesthetics, water resources, and one of the biological mitigation measures, and recommended modifying one biological mitigation measure and retaining another. They did not direct recirculation of the EIR, and that was clearly before them. They continued their hearing to October 11th to make their final recommendation to the board based upon the direction that they gave us at that August 29th hearing. And then that hearing was later moved to October 3rd to